I woke up choking on my own breath because someone was knocking on my bedroom door even though I lived completely alone, and that violent, rapid knocking sent a current of cold fear straight down my spine as I bolted upright, grabbed my phone, and saw 3:02 a.m. glowing on the screen, and before I could ask who was there the knocking stopped and something slid under the door, a small white paper that landed with a soft hiss on the carpet, and when I crawled forward with trembling fingers I saw the bold red letters first. HOA violation, unauthorized male presence in second floor window, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy because I knew nobody had been in my room, nobody lived with me, and the window behind me was locked from the inside. I tore open the notice and read the description written by one of my neighbors who claimed they saw a tall man standing in her bedroom window for exactly 7 minutes, and for a full minute I couldn't even breathe as I turned slowly toward the window, the blinds still closed, the glass still dark, and I whispered, "Hello." Even though every nerve in my body begged me not to, I flicked on the light, yanked the blinds up, and stared into the night, seeing nothing but the stillness of my backyard and the faint glow from the porch lights 2 houses down, and yet my pulse wouldn't slow down because the violation notice mentioned something even worse. The HOA camera captured movement in my window, but the footage glitched and distorted. Before they could confirm the figure's identity, I ran downstairs, unlocked my laptop, and accessed the HOA portal, my hands shaking while I clicked the incident footage tab and waited for the buffering circle to disappear, and when it finally played I saw my own dark window appear on the grainy screen, the timestamp blinking 2:46 a.m., and then the frame flickered violently like static was crawling across it, and for a split second a silhouette formed, a tall shape, shoulders broad, head slightly tilted as if watching something inside my room, and my stomach dropped so hard I felt nauseous because it didn't look like a stranger, it looked familiar, painfully familiar, like someone whose memory I had buried years ago. Suddenly a sharp creak came from upstairs as if someone was shifting their weight directly above me, and I froze, listening, terrified to even breathe as the house settled into a tense silence. Then my phone buzzed violently in my hand and I nearly screamed when I saw another HOA alert. Second warning issued, repeat presence detected at 3 a.m., and attached was a low-resolution photo taken from across the street, showing my dark window with a shadow leaning forward, almost pressed against the glass, the outline of his face sharp enough to see a resemblance I refused to accept. I backed away from the laptop, whispering, "This has to be a mistake," but deep down a part of me knew the truth I had been avoiding for years, the same truth that began haunting me the night I moved into this house. Someone I once loved, someone I lost, someone whose death I was never able to move past, and the image in the photo looked too much like him. The same height, same posture, same quiet stillness, and as a cold ripple of dread tightened around my chest I realized the wall wasn't just fining me for a stranger, they were warning me about a presence I had never truly escaped. The rest of the night felt like a waking nightmare as I sat at the bottom of the staircase gripping the violation notices with cramped fingers, listening for any sound upstairs and trying to convince myself that trauma couldn't materialize into a shape at my window, but denial crumbled when the lights flickered overhead in a slow pulse as if someone was walking across the upstairs hallway. And my breath came out in shallow bursts as memories I'd tried to bury clawed their way back. The accident, the guilt, the way I had replayed that night over and over until the pain hardened into something cold and silent, and now that silence felt like it had followed me into this house. When the sun finally rose I went straight to the HOA office before they even opened, practically banging on the glass door until the sleepy clerk let me in, his expression shifting when he saw my address because he didn't act surprised at all, he actually looked uncomfortable. I demanded to know who filed the complaint, who recorded the footage, and why the cameras glitched only when pointed at my window, but he shook his head and said, "Ms. Carter, you're not the first homeowner in that lot to report strange sightings," and that sentence hit like an icy stab because it didn't answer anything, it only raised more questions. He slid a sealed envelope across the counter and told me the HOA president insisted I receive it immediately, and inside was a single printed note. "We know who he is, and why he's back." Fear and anger tangled inside me as I stormed into the president's office demanding an explanation, but she only stared at me with a mix of pity and warning, saying the house I lived in had a history of attachments tied to unresolved emotional trauma, and I laughed in disbelief until she mentioned his name. My ex, the one who died, the one I had loved more than anything, the one I couldn't save, and suddenly all the air left my lungs as she gently asked, "Did you ever truly let him go?" That night I returned home shaking, forcing myself to go upstairs even as every instinct screamed not to, and when I opened my bedroom door the air felt heavier, charged, familiar in a way that made my eyes sting, and I whispered his name into the dimness, feeling ridiculous until the temperature dropped sharply, my breath turning white in the air as the curtains fluttered without wind, and the reflection in the window shifted, forming a faint outline behind me that wasn't mine. Tears blurred my vision as I turned slowly, whispering, "What do you want?" And the atmosphere pressed in around me as if an unseen presence was leaning close, trying to speak, trying to reach me, and for the first time I didn't run, didn't deny what I felt, because a part of me had sensed him for months. The cold spots, the dreams, the feeling of being watched not with malice but with longing. Suddenly my phone buzzed with a new WA alert. Final notice, unresolved presence must be addressed immediately, which sounded less like a warning and more like a demand that I confront the truth I'd suppressed, and when I looked back at the window I saw it clearly now. The shadow was not threatening, not violent, not something trying to hurt me, but something that had been trapped between grief and memory, unable to move on because I hadn't let him. I stepped forward, whispering, "I'm sorry, I kept you here," and the room warmed slightly as the outline dissolved into a soft shimmer, fading like a final exhale, and for the first time since the accident I felt the weight lift off my chest as if he had finally been released. When I walked downstairs afterward, the house felt different, lighter, safer, almost peaceful, and the last WA alert I received simply said, "Presence resolved," and even though the chills remained, the lesson was clear. Some ghosts aren't here to haunt you, they're here to remind you to let go before grief becomes the thing that lives inside your window. The days after the final WA alert felt deceptively calm, as if the house had taken a long breath after years of suffocation, but deep inside I knew the situation wasn't over because every time I walked past my staircase I felt a strange pull toward the attic, a place I hadn't dared to enter since moving in, and that quiet dread grew stronger when I received an email from the WA titled Mandatory Follow-up, instructing me to visit the community office for an emotional residue evaluation, a term that made no sense and sounded more like a paranormal checkup than a housing regulation, but I went anyway because the last thing I wanted was another round of fines related to a presence I thought I had finally released. When I walked into the office the employees looked at me with a guarded sympathy, the kind people reserve for someone who survived something they can't fully explain, and the WA president motioned me into a back room filled with dusty files, old photographs, and a large binder labeled Property Lot 73, Historical Cases, which was my house. She opened the binder carefully and told me that every homeowner before me had experienced sightings of someone they once loved, someone they lost, and each case followed a pattern of unresolved trauma manifesting in the windows of the second floor, almost like the house amplified grief into a visible shape until the homeowner confronted it. I sat frozen as she showed me old photos taken by past residents, grainy images of silhouettes that didn't belong in their homes, each resembling someone meaningful to them, someone gone, and the most unsettling part was that every silhouette was always seen in the same window, the one in my bedroom, the one where my own past had visited me. She said gently that the presence leaving didn't mean the attachment was resolved, because sometimes the connection runs deeper than the ghost itself, and whatever bound those past souls to the house might still linger in the air waiting for the next emotional fracture to reopen, which explained why I still felt watched whenever I walked the upstairs hallway. Unsettled and confused, I returned home and tried to distract myself, but that night the temperature dropped again, not sharply, not like before, but just enough to make me stop mid-step as I reached the top of the stairs, and the faintest whisper of movement came from the attic door, a soft shifting sound like someone pacing slowly inside. I stood frozen because the attic had always been sealed shut, the WA had even inspected it during my move-in process, and now something, memory or presence or both, seemed to be calling from behind the door. Compelled by something I couldn't name, I climbed the ladder and pushed the attic door open, feeling a wave of cold air crawl across my skin, and in the dim, dusty darkness I saw a single object lying in the center, an old, yellowed envelope with my name written on it in handwriting I recognized instantly, handwriting belonging to the man I lost. My throat tightened painfully as I picked it up. the scent of old paper hitting me like a flood of memories, and when I carefully opened it a small folded note fell out, containing just 5 words. You never said goodbye. My knees almost buckled because I had never told anyone about our last fight, the regret that had lived like a silent parasite inside me, feeding on guilt for years, and this note was something he wrote before the accident, something I never received, something that was meant to bring us back together but instead had been swallowed by time until the house somehow drew it out. Suddenly the attic lights flickered and the air thickened, and I felt a presence again, not as a shadow this time but as a weight of emotion, thick and real, wrapping around me, pressing on the memories I had tried to forget. And as I clutched the note to my chest, tears spilled down my face because I understood now. The silhouette in the window was never just a ghost, it was the embodiment of a message he never delivered, a goodbye I never spoke, and now the house was forcing me to confront everything I had buried before it consumed me the way it consumed every homeowner who came before me. I descended from the attic clutching the envelope with trembling hands, each step feeling heavier than the last as though the very walls of the house were listening to my heartbeat, waiting to see whether I would finally face the truth or keep running from the ache that had shaped my life since the night he died. And when I reached the bottom of the stairs the living room lights flickered in a slow, deliberate rhythm that no electrical issue could explain, almost like a gentle knock summoned by emotion rather than force. And I stood in the center of the room whispering his name into the air, feeling the space tighten around me. The temperature dropped just enough to raise goosebumps across my skin. For a moment nothing happened, and then the shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally, bending in a way that wasn't possible, merging slowly into a faint outline near the window, the same spot where he used to stand when he waited for me to open the door, the same posture, the same stillness, but softer now, less like a haunting and more like a memory taking shape. I held the note tightly and whispered, I didn't say goodbye because I thought I'd have more time, and the air shifted violently, as if the house reacted to the honesty, and for a second it felt like I wasn't alone, like someone unseen was close enough to touch. Tears blurred my vision as I confessed the guilt I had carried for years, how our last argument had ended with silence, how I never apologized, how I had waited for the right moment that never came. And as I spoke the outline in the shadows flickered like a candle flame struggling against wind, not fading completely but trembling as if it heard me. The envelope in my hand warmed slightly and suddenly the entire upstairs hallway creaked loudly, as though footsteps were crossing it again, except this time there was no fear, only a strange comfort, a sense that he wasn't trapped anymore but was moving freely one last time to listen. And when the footsteps stopped the shadow near the window deepened then softened as if someone inhaled and slowly exhaled their final breath. I stepped closer, whispering, I loved you, a truth I had never been able to say out loud after the accident, and the moment the words escaped my lips the coldness lifted from the room, replaced by a gentle warmth that wrapped around me like an embrace, and the shadow dissolved into a thin streak of soft light before disappearing entirely, leaving the window clear and ordinary for the first time since I moved in. The house sighed with quiet relief, the lights steadied, and for a long moment everything felt still and healed, as though the emotional residue the wall warned me about had finally been released. Later that night I received one last message from the HOA, not a warning, not a fine, simply a short notification, case closed, presence released, and beneath it a handwritten note from the president. Sometimes the living need peace more than the dead. I sat on the couch holding the final message with tears still drying on my cheeks, realizing that the haunting was never meant to scare me, it was meant to return a missing piece of my heart I didn't know how to face, and the house, with its long history of emotional echoes, had simply amplified the goodbye that time had stolen. As I looked at the quiet window, now empty and calm, I understood the moral carved into the entire experience. Grief doesn't haunt us because of the dead, it haunts us because of the words we never say, the apologies we postpone, the goodbyes we avoid, and unless we confront them, they will appear in every dark window of our lives until we finally choose to let them rest.